I was really blessed because from the time I was born, I knew I was going to college as soon as I knew what college was. I came from a family that valued education, and I think we're all here today because we know that not everybody has the same opportunities. There's lots of, it was just a given. I couldn't understand why my mother started crying when I graduated from high school. To me, it was just normal. This is what everybody does. Well, it took me a while to figure out that it's not what everybody does, and there is an issue in our country, and we've heard about that today. And so we're all here today to figure out what it is that we need to do to get that graduation rate up to 100%. We're a country that can do amazing things. We've done amazing things in medical technology. We've done amazing things, going to the outer space. This is a problem that we really can solve, and I'm. Let's see, get my technology is not my strong suit. Go back. So the main things I want us to focus on today, and this is what our center is really quite famous for. We actually can solve this problem because we can locate the problem. We know where it's concentrated. We can actually identify which students are unlikely to graduate based on data that districts collect routinely. It doesn't take lots of extra data collection to figure this out. And we have interventions that have a track record of actually working to keep students on track to on-time graduation. And that's what I want to talk about today, the work of our center. And you probably know the name of Bob Balfonts and Eddie Legters, my colleagues who have done a lot of this work that I'll be talking about today. Well, I'm going to start by saying that, if we're going to talk about where the problem is concentrated, Kansas is really way above average. Your graduation rate is way above the national average and has been for a long time. So I'm really impressed that you're very concerned about focusing on this. And what you might notice from this graph is that when you compare states, you have to have a common metric to compare them. And so most of the other publications are finding a 75% graduation rate for Kansas. And so the first question, and Jessica thought it might be helpful for me to explain why there's different graduation rates. That gets into this, sort of the technical, how did these things get calculated. And so just to put in my little graph here, the way that the Kansas does it is really the majority way that the country does it. There's 26 other states that use this Iver rate, which is really the count of graduates over the count of grads plus dropouts over the past 4 years. And if you can think mathematically about that, that all depends on getting the number of dropouts correct. And what happens across the country is that often is underestimated. And so they've come up with a different metric, and actually the federal regulations now require what's called a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, which gets rid of that problem of actually counting the dropouts. It counts all the 9th graders in a particular year, and then subtracts out all those who transfer, adds in all those who move into this state, and then looks at the proportion of those earning a regular diploma over that denominator. And that's what, I guess all states are moving towards that eventually on different rates. And so that's much closer to the rate that's published in the things like diploma counts in the Education Week. And so I wanted to start there just because to put us in national perspective, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next couple of slides because the Lieutenant Governor actually talked about how big a problem this is. And the data that I had over 9,000 students not graduating from Kansas last year, and I know there's a little discrepancy there. The question that I would say, I always went, because I deal with data all the time, I've got data files, and whenever I find a discrepancy, I have to ask myself, why, what's explaining that? And so that's a question we might want to talk about later. But focusing in on where the problem gets concentrated, what this graph is, if you've got this, and you probably can't read it very well, but basically it's a graph of each grade level starting from 1st grade up through 12th grade and diploma recipients. So the light blue is elementary grades, the white is the middle grades, and the purple is the high school grades, and the last gold is the number of graduates. That's starting with 1st graders in 93, 94, and counting, and then 2nd graders in 94, 95, and sort of looking at the counts over time. What you see from that graph basically is that kids get stuck in 9th grade. You see that big hump there? And what that means is there's all the regular 9th graders, then there's all the repeat 9th graders, those who didn't manage to get passed out of ninth grade, didn't manage to earn the credits. It's the first time, when you hit high school, it's the first time you have to start earning credits, passing classes and earning credits. And so what we find is that that's a pattern that is in almost every state. The next graph is, I know this is really busy, this is off, we have a graph like this for every state on our website, and you can see that that's the same this is a year later, this is the class of 2006, but there's that hump, not quite as big in Kansas as in the national data, but there's still a hump there. It's not always the case that, I did run into a district in Colorado that didn't have that policy that you had to pass your classes in ninth grade to get promoted, and so they had, most of their dropouts were 12th graders. They just, and somebody was really confused about that, how could that be? Well, it turned out that you didn't have to, they just kept on passing them up, and so they got to 12th grade, not realizing that they didn't have enough credits to graduate. So you can see that the problem gets concentrated in that ninth grade year, and we've done a lot of work at our center on this whole issue of what do we do about that thing. And you can ask students, and Jessica talked about the survey they've done in Kansas, and there's been national work. The silent epidemic is a study, looking at focus groups of students, and many students tell you that they're just bored with the classes. Some will admit that it's due to academic failure, but many emphasize that they're bored. It's taken a long time. It's a multi-year process of disengagement. Sometimes it's a life event. It's a health issue or a pregnancy or needing to get a job. But the real sad thing about that research from the silent epidemic is that most of the students that they talk to deeply, deeply regret dropping out. They had high aspirations, and it's something that they did not really, they realize now that it was a very, very bad decision. Okay. So we learn a lot by talking to dropouts, but we can also learn a lot, and I think it's really what I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about is that what we can learn from the data that schools routinely collect, because I think sometimes we ignore some of the obvious things that are right there. What we've found in the research that we've been doing at our center is that dropouts, for the most part, not everybody, but the big majority are easily identifiable for years in advance. They're giving warning signals. They're literally sort of waving their hands, and they're sticking it out, from 6th through 9th grade, and then eventually sort of, they've fallen off track somewhere along the line and eventually leave. And what we've basically learned from the data that we've looked at quite a few different districts now, and I've just finished the study in Colorado that Zach mentioned, that students are knocked off course to graduation by the ABCs: attendance problems, behavior problems, and course failure. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let me show you, this is some data from Philadelphia. One of our studies we've done a number of these. It takes a lot of data to be able to do this study, because you have to start with students in 6th grade and follow them forward over time, 7 years to their on-time graduation rate. And then we actually followed them a year and a half longer in Philadelphia for this study. And we were looking for, I was not part of the team, but my colleagues were looking for what were the indicators in 6th grade that were great predictors of non-graduation, but also identified a large group of students. You can have a great predictor that's, like some, detrimental thing happening in your family, which is going to sort of lead you not to finish school. But what are the things that identify lots of students? And what they found was 4 main things. Attendance, in Philadelphia, it was attending 80% or less of the time. If you failed math, or you failed English, or you were suspended in 6th grade, that identified a large group, probably almost 50% of the students who would eventually drop out from that cohort. That kind of way of doing data analysis doesn't take account of the kids who are coming into the system later, and we can talk more about that later. But this is, for kids who are going through a system, those are the indicators that where you could see them way back in 6th grade. Okay, we did some similar research in Boston, and what we found there is that you could identify 43% of eventual dropouts by the end of 6th grade, another 32%, another third by the end of 9th grade. There was still a quarter of students who were somehow, had some kind of life event or something happened after 9th grade, but the vast majority of students could be identified by the 9th grade. Okay, and then